I'm struck by the extraordinary history of this moment. A sitting president in self-isolation because of COVID, announcing in a letter that he would not seek re-election. I think this was the direction of travel ever since that debate performance with Donald Trump, ever since the first 15 minutes of that debate performance with Donald Trump, when it became clear that his cognitive decline was going to be a big problem and that Democrats would express deep concerns. And of course, one of the first people to do that was the former House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, going on a program called Morning Joe, which is one of Joe Biden's favorite political talk shows, and suggesting that he should make up his decision quickly about whether he should seek re-election. That opened the floodgates, Lisa. Nancy Pelosi's daughter once famously said that her mum can take off somebody's head without them even realizing it. But Joe Biden would have realized in that moment that there was a critical mass of senior Democrats who were very worried about his chances of re-election and wanted him to stand down. And in the last week or so, we've seen that happen. The Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, meeting Joe Biden at Rehoboth Beach and telling him the polling was terrible. Nancy Pelosi expressing that message herself. Hakeem Jeffries, who's the most senior Democrat in the House of Representatives, also telling Joe Biden that his chances of re-election was so poor. And amidst all that, there was no real support coming from people like Barack Obama or Bill Clinton coming out and saying, you cannot say to a sitting president they have to step aside. Their silence spoke volumes. So when those stories emerged at the end of last week that Joe Biden was considering this and that the decision would come maybe as soon as the weekend, well, that's exactly what's happened.
What are the strengths that Kamala Harris will be taking forward as she may very well have to fight to become the nominee?
Well, I think her main strength at the moment is she's not Joe Biden and she's not 81 years old, and people aren't questioning her capabilities of actually being able to perform the task of president, which obviously were questions that were being raised about Joe Biden. But Lisa, one of the reasons why he decided to seek re-election, one of the reasons why he stayed around for so long was his concerns that Kamala Harris was not electable, that she would face misogyny, that she would face racism. When he himself faced her in the Democratic primaries back in 2019, 2020, she wasn't a very strong candidate. Indeed, she didn't even make it as far as 2020. She pulled out in 2019. And I think Joe Biden, even though he selected her as his vice president, he was worried that she had the ability to actually win election against Donald Trump. Her strengths, well, she is younger, obviously. She's more dynamic. In recent weeks, ever since that poor performance by Joe Biden, people have been struck by her improved performances as vice president. But the Democrats clearly had to do something dramatic. But I think it's interesting, Lisa, that in their remarks so far, people like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer aren't endorsing Kamala Harris in the same way that Joe Biden did so emphatically minutes after he'd announced his withdrawal from the race.
What does this mean for Donald Trump? I see that he's already talking about if Biden's not fit to run for president, he's not fit to serve for president. So he's still got him in his sights, even though Joe Biden has said that he won't be running.
Yeah, I think this is a crucial moment for Donald Trump, but at the moment he's showing his usual gracelessness. I mean, all this idea that Trump had changed after the assassination attempt in Pennsylvania, I was very skeptical about this at the time. I'd seen him during COVID, and he didn't change then when he had a near-death experience. And when CNN contacted him minutes after the news from Rehoboth Beach that Biden was pulling out of the race, I mean, he just described him instantly as the worst president in the history of the American Republic. Now, that is not a particularly graceful way to deal with the departure of somebody who has served America in the manner of Joe Biden. And I think they could really play this very badly. If they try and blast Joe Biden out of the White House, I think there could be a groundswell of sympathy around Joe Biden. You know, and it's not the kind of rusted-on voters that matter here, of course, Lisa. It's the wavering voters, those who haven't yet made up their mind. There aren't that many of them, but they are the critical demographic in this election. They're going to be looking at this moment. They're going to be looking how Donald Trump reacts to it. And if he continues along this path of sort of blasting Joe Biden and being very graceless about it, I think that could damage him amongst those wavering voters, especially sort of suburban women who tend to decide presidential elections.
And just stepping back, Nick, finally, you've written about the US, not just the politics, the culture, the society over many years. We started this conversation with you saying that it was an extraordinary time, but the shock of it, we're not even up to 2 hours yet since the announcement was made by Joe Biden. Have you ever seen anything like this?
Well, we have seen something like it before. In 1952, Harry Truman decided not to seek a re-election, and the Republicans won in that year. That was the first victory of Eisenhower. In 1968, in March, of course, Lyndon Baines Johnson decided to step aside. His vice president, Hubert Humphrey, ended up fighting that 1968 election. And of course, he lost up against Richard Nixon, winning his first victory. But there's another history as well that comes into play, which is American voters tend to punish presidents who are perceived to be weak or frail. That happened to Jimmy Carter in 1976. He ended up being a one-term president after Reagan beat him in 1980. It happened as well with George Herbert Walker Bush in the 1992 election when he was defeated by Bill Clinton. There were just a lot of American voters who just thought that George Herbert Walker Bush had done his dash, that he was too old to be president. And I think Joe Biden would have faced that as well. I do think that debate performance had made him virtually unelectable. The Democrats needed something dramatic to happen in the aftermath of the debate performance to change the narrative. And of course, it did, but it happened to Donald Trump with that that assassination attempt. So I do think electorally for the Democrats, Joe Biden has done the right thing. The question is whether Kamala Harris is the right candidate to beat Donald Trump.
24 days since that debate, an extraordinary 24 days. Nick Bryant, so great to have your analysis this morning. Thank you.
You're welcome.